Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. Last show of May of 2024. We are getting ready to jump into the 6th month of the year. So, fun show today. We had a chance to sit down with a longtime friend of ours, Tim Crawford, who is a founder and sort of CEO of Avoa. He is kind of the person that we go to really kind of dive deep into, what's it like to get inside the mind of CIOs, of executives that are responsible for technology. And Tim is one of the most well-known out in the industry. He's all over the place. You'll see him at trade shows. You'll see him at conferences. You'll see him speaking and writing all over the place. So Tim's somebody we've known for a long time. We've had a chance to interact with him quite a bit over the last, 15 or so years. And he really has a good sense of, how do CIOs think about technology trends? How do they think about balancing technology and the business needs? How do they think about, what's hype versus, short-term investments, long-term investments? So we dig into all that in today's show, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, and we're going to dive into our interview with Tim Crawford. Remember when ChatGPT launched? It felt like magic right out of the box. However, as we've now seen, an LLM might be brilliant technology, but it's not accurate by itself. For an enterprise-grade Gen AI app, you have to feed the LLM the reliable, current data. Then it can make connections and provide context. And for that, you need a database with the right capabilities. The team at Neo4j has been exploring how to get results by pairing LLMs with knowledge graphs and vector search. Check out their podcast episode about LLMs and knowledge graphs throughout 2023 at graphstuff.fm. They share tips on retrieval methods, prompt engineering, and much more. Don't miss it. You'll also find the link in the show notes. That's graphstuff.fm. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. I'm your co-host, Brian Gracely, along as always with Aaron Delp. Aaron, how you been, man?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. You look like you are getting ready to do some things. You're hatted up, t-shirt up. What's on the agenda?
Yeah, after we record this, I head off to move one kid out of college, and hopefully we can get that done today. You never know. She's got a ton of shit. And then the other one graduates college later this week as well. So
amazing,
it is a busy week for me.
We one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about technology on the show. We do our best to try and frame it in the context of how people use technology in terms of how they kind of marry technology with what the business problem is. But we oftentimes, I think you and I maybe frame this a little bit in the context of vice president and below, in terms of people that are executing things. And we don't necessarily get to dig into kind of the brain or the mind of what's going on with CIOs, because their world is very complicated. It's very, they have to both be tactical as well as strategic. And today we're going to get to dig into that with somebody who spends the vast majority of his time with CIOs. So why don't you introduce our guest?
Yeah, absolutely. So today we have Tim Crawford, CIO Advisor at Avoa. First of all, Tim, is that how you say it?
That is how you say it.
All right, fantastic. So first of all, we've been friends for years, so it's great to get to talk to you today, and it's super fun to pick your brain. I know I've done it periodically on the side a number of times, so thank you for that. But our big topic today, as Brian mentioned, we're going to really dig into the mind of the CIO. So why don't you give everyone just a quick background of how you became known as the CIO Advisor?
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. And always great to see both of you. As you mentioned, we've known each other for years now. And so it's been great to kind of see the evolution as we've gone through these conversations. I'm a former CIO myself. I've led IT organizations most of my career. So hands-on roles, operational roles, but kind of shifted gears several years ago into one where I started advising other CIOs and kind of working more as a CIO at large. And then that kind of parlayed into advising enterprise vendors on their strategies and how they're engaging with CIOs. So I still work with that CIO mindset, but I'm now applying it in many different ways. And so that's been kind of exciting because I get to see both the inside conversations with other CIOs, kind of that cone of silence, never to see the light of day kind of conversation. And then I also get to see the vendors and kind of how they're thinking about it, or maybe how they should think about it in some cases. And we get to have those chats around where the gaps are. So seeing the buy side and the sell side has been really intriguing. And that's been going on now for several years, and I'm having a blast.
Yeah, no, we as you mentioned, we've known you for a long time. We run into each other a lot whenever there are events, whether they are industry events, analyst events. We've had a chance to kind of speak a lot about things. I'm curious, and I know the answer to this is it's going to depend a little bit. But if you were to characterize a CIO in 2024, what does that person look like? Where's their motivations? Do they typically come more so from sort of the technology, kind of up through the ranks of technology? Do they tend to be more, they came from the business and they're bringing sort of a business of, frame of mind to the technology groups? What's, kind of put us in the headspace of today's modern CIO in terms of what their priorities are, how far ahead of things they're thinking, what are their motivations for their career, those types of things.
Yeah. And it's changed. It's changed considerably. I mean, just in the last 10 years, let alone 20 plus. But we still see CIOs that are coming up through the rank and file and get promoted up through as CIO. But there's kind of this gap. You mentioned as part of your opener that you tend to focus on the VP and below. And there's this huge gap that goes between the VP and the CIO in terms of the mindset, how they're engaging, who they're engaging with, what they're focused on, what keeps them up at night. And that's still coming from an individual that typically comes up through the IT organization. There was a period of time that we saw individuals, leaders that were coming from other parts of the company, other parts of the business, and stepping into the CIO role. And that didn't last too long. Every once in a while, you'll see it, but it's not common. And a lot of the reason for that is because, as we all know, and I think your audience knows this really well, technology is complicated. And a lot of folks that work outside of IT don't understand, let alone respect that. So having someone that leads the organization that IT folks can trust is really, really important. Now, one of the things I will say is that the CIO today has to be a business leader first that happens to have responsibility for technology. So what that means is that you have to think about the bigger picture of the company and what's important to the company. And technology really becomes not just a support organization, but really becomes the enabler, especially in the last several years where we've seen the importance of technology to our businesses. You can't run a business today without technology. Right, and interestingly enough, you also can't switch technology off and run a business manually anymore because people have just forgotten the processes. So it is a different mindset. It's a much more elevated mindset. And the CIO in the last few years, that role has really kind of risen to prominence in a way we've never seen in the past. And I'm sure we'll talk a little more about that. But those are kind of the top line items that I think are important to note.
Yeah. So Tim, let me kind of maybe break that down one step further though, too. We've heard many times CIOs kind of tend to think about two big buckets, right? Like keeping the lights on, the boring side of the business that just keeps everything, maybe I'll call it undifferentiated, right? Operations, right? And then the innovation side that kind of moves the needle. And I've heard like numbers thrown around, it's like 65-35 or, 75-25 and the CIO's job at a higher level is to minimize the former and maximize the latter. Do you agree with that statement? And how accurate is that? Is that an oversimplification?
Yeah, I mean, it is true. There is a fundamental requirement that if you can't keep your operations in order, you have no business being able to talk about future state for your organization. I mean, it really does come down to that. So what I do see and what I've done and what other CIOs have done in the past is, and what they do today, is you surround yourself with folks within your leadership team that really get the operations and they've got that down. And the more efficient and effective you can be with your operations, the more headspace you have to talk about the more interesting things. And yes, I did say that operations or suggested operations is somewhat uninteresting. But I think more importantly, it's one of those things where it has to be brass tacks. It has to be table stakes for organizations. And if you're really struggling to keep the lights on, keep systems up, keep applications running, you've got a real problem, especially today. I realize that IT is complicated, but with all of the tools that exist today, there are a lot of ways that you can kind of minimize the risk or de-risk your operations to be able to stabilize them. That then opens the door to more advanced and mature conversations around where the company is going and how you can use technology in more innovative ways. As to the percentage, I think that really goes alongside how mature the thinking of the organization is. And that's not just within IT or the CIO, but it's also how the rest of the organization views the role of IT. So you may have the most innovative CIO, and I've run across folks in this position many times. You've got a great CIO, very forward-thinking, very strategic, has their operations, in check, but the rest of the organization does not look at IT as a strategic organization. They look at it as kind of a ticket taker, or you're the folks that keep the lights on and focus on the operations. And yeah, we're not going to bring you into those really kind of juicy, interesting conversations. That's changing. It's changing out of necessity, but it's also changing because people are starting to realize that a really good CIO can really deliver differentiation for a company in ways that they've never been able to capitalize in the past. And that's a huge shift. But it does require, as you said, Aaron, it requires you to kind of get your operations in check. And if you can't do that, you gotta walk before you run, right?
Yeah, no, makes sense. I mean, it's something we talk about all the time, whether it's operations, how you do cloud. I mean, if you don't do the fundamentals of IT well, you're going to have all sorts of problems with everything else. You're going to be fighting more complaints and other things. I want to kind of have you walk us through a little bit of maybe what you would advise, but maybe just more so the CIO mindset, how they would think about a problem. So something we've talked about a number of times on the show is right now it feels like, and again, this may just be a 2024 specific kind of way of thinking about things, but it feels like on one end, because of what's going on with Broadcom and VMware, people have talked about very large price increases or changes of subscription models. A lot of sort of uncertainty about that on one end of the spectrum, which would fit more in the keep the operations running, do the mainstream types of things. And then on the other end, you've got various levels of pressure of like, hey, the business could benefit from some of that that AI stuff. Walk us through the one end of the spectrum. If you are you're a CIO, and let's just use Broadcom and VMware as an example. We don't have to get into specifics for any any given business, but let's suppose something comes along from a technology perspective, and all of a sudden it is a significant change in your budget. So in the case of Broadcom and VMware, right. You're switching from perpetual license to subscription license, and maybe it's 3x what it was, or 5x, or whatever it was. It's significant enough that you say, I now have to think about how much does this impact the overall budget. What's the thought process that you've seen CIOs go through when a scenario like that happens?
Yeah, it's a great example. It's been a frustrating one for leaders, not just CIOs, but folks within the organization, because they've built not just financial structures around VMware, but they've also built organizations around VMware and that expertise.
Sure.
And when you start to see things happen like what's happened with Broadcom acquiring VMware, and then the license, not just the license shift. I don't think moving from perpetual license to subscription really kind of moves the needle in a positive or negative way. But the multiples that Broadcom is now asking folks to pay, I mean, 2-3x is just a start. I've heard even more than that from some organizations. And that's really scary because you don't necessarily have that. So what happens is you end up blowing your budget, and then you have to backpedal from that. But you also then start looking at exit doors. You start to go, okay, well, if they're going to go 2-3x this year, what are they going to do next year? And what about the year after that? And is the value still there? Because there are two pieces that you have to think about with any product. This isn't specific to VMware, but with any product, you have to think about value. And value is an equation that looks at what's your total cost of ownership, what's your total cost to operate that particular product, and what are you getting for that, meaning what's the value that your organization benefits from it. And then the second piece is switching costs. And you have to understand, so if I didn't see the value there, what's the alternative? And what would it take to be able to move to that alternative? So there are two pieces to the switching cost, right? What is the alternative and what are the options? Unfortunately, we've seen the demise in this space over the last several years where you used to have some really good alternatives. You know, KVM, Hyper-V, Nutanix had their hypervisor as well. And there were tools that would allow you to move across. I mean, a lot of that has kind of fallen by the wayside, and VMware just kind of was the last stalwart. And I think from a business standpoint, you know, which is the other piece that we often look at the things from a CIO perspective, is what's Broadcom's move here? I mean, this is a big chess game. In a major way, this is a chess game. And so if you can start to understand what their motivations are, you can start to understand, okay, does that align with what you're trying to do and what you need to do for your organization or not? And so I saw this coming years ago. I think many CIOs saw this coming years ago as soon as the intent to acquire VMware was put on the table, that we knew how this was going to play out. And I think some folks are kind of shell-shocked to actually see it play out and going, wow, can't believe that they're doing this. But guess what? This has been done over decades, meaning other companies have done the same exact thing over decades. And what you end up seeing is this bleed of customers off of the platform because the value isn't there, and the switching costs start to come down because the value isn't there. So it makes it easier to switch and more valuable to switch. There's a lot of conversation happening right now around, okay, what's my alternative? Can I use some of the more advanced tools that are on the market today to move those workloads to private cloud or to public cloud or to an alternative platform? Or maybe, you know what? It's time to rip the Band-Aid off and get rid of this older bespoke application and move to a SaaS-based offering that's an alternative. And maybe we get 80% of the usefulness of it. But that's compared with the alternative and the costs associated with it. The problem, you know, on the whole, if we kind of back away from this and look at it from a macro level, the problem that you have from a CIO perspective is it becomes a huge time sink, because now all of a sudden, instead of going through a normal cycle of evaluating your portfolio, determining how you're going to move and planning that out, now your hand is kind of forced because your CFO is coming at you going, whoa, hold on a sec. You know, when I had my budget, operational IT budget, VMware was one of the top 2 line items beyond people. So people was obviously the biggest, and then VMware licensing was often one of the top 2. And so it was always a conversation with my finance team around, okay, so are we getting the value there, and where do we go, et cetera. That, unfortunately, is front and center for CIOs today. They have to figure out, okay, are we going to suck it up and blow our budget and know that that's where we're stuck for a period of time? Or is the value still there? I mean, it's entirely possible that, you know what, 2x, 3x, yeah, it's still valuable to stay with VMware. I don't want to say that it's all negative, but for a lot of folks, there's a huge sticker shock that's causing them to look for the exit doors as quickly as they can, because not just what's happening today, but what's going to happen next year and the year after. And so they're looking at those alternatives. It just becomes a big distraction at this point. I think once we kind of have a plan, then we can move our focus elsewhere.
Yeah, Aaron and I have talked about this. This feels like a 12 month sort of situation that one way or other will work itself out. You'll either stick with it or you'll make a change. But yeah, it feels like a 12, maybe 18 month phenomenon.
It does.
Yeah.
But the other thing, Brian, is if you look at it from Broadcom's perspective, so imagine you're Hock Tan and you're sitting in the driver's seat, and you know that the switching costs for VMware are really, really high. And there isn't a real good alternative. You kind of have a captive audience, right?
Oh yeah.
And so capitalize on that investment as much as you can, and take advantage of that for your shareholders. So I get it. I totally get it. But unfortunately, it's leaving a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. And I think that's going to have some significant brand erosion for both Broadcom and VMware.
Yeah. And Tim, I want to get your thoughts on AI, but before I do, I wanted to kind of relate the VMware thing to a conversation I had with actually a CIO in my day job. And it was interesting. Like the biggest takeaway they were kind of advising, technical sales and marketing people, like, how do you get in our mindset kind of thing. And it was interesting to say, they're like, look, I don't buy products. I don't care what products they are. I just simply buy a solution, and I have a budget with a whole bunch of buckets and line items. And each of those solutions, there's a line item in it. So they're like, don't try and sell the product, sell the solution, but also make sure, what bucket are you fitting in? Are you fitting in that keep the lights on bucket? Are you fitting in that innovation bucket? Are you rarely crossing both? And like, how do you target buckets and budgets? And is that a way to good way to think about this? Like you're talking about VMware and alternatives, right?
Yeah. And I used to do something very similar with my budget. And I've actually presented on this with other CIOs around financial management. Financial management is something that has kind of become in vogue in the last year, which is kind of weird to me, because it should be table stakes for most IT organizations, but wasn't necessarily. It was some organizations, sadly, were kind of fly by the seat of their pants. It's budget time. Let's throw together a spreadsheet and do the minimum required and as much as we know, and we'll just kind of wing it. Whereas others are much more sophisticated in the way that they manage their finances and can project out multiple years. And that's exactly what we did. So within an annual budget, and we had a multi-year budget that went with it, but within our annual budget, I kind of broke things down into two categories. I had my operational category, which was the keep the lights on. And then I had what I called discretionary. And discretionary was anything net new. So anything new or any change to the operational. And the reason I did this was early in my career, I realized very clearly that high dollar value items, like I mentioned, VMware, Oracle was another one that, was a big license item, but they would get the attention. However, what you want to bring the attention to is not the things that keep the lights on. You want to bring the attention to the things that are variable, the things that change year to year. And so for financial folks, they want to know kind of what's the steady eddy, what's the minimum to keep the lights on and keep things going. And then they want to know, okay, so how's that variable piece taking place over the course of each year? Am I looking at 20% increase year one and 50 year two and nothing year three and 75 year four? How does that play out? And so by breaking it up between an operational component, which is pretty standard, pretty even year over year, You're going to have some increases for support and maintenance, and you're also going to have some changes that you're going to have to do that are part of the standard operational requirements. But then what it does is it brings the focus to those discretional projects, and those discretional projects, and maybe discretional was not the right word to use, but it at least brought the right attention to the right place, where we could say, look, we're going to spend $500,000 on this particular project in discretional, and here's the outcome that comes with it. And so then you can tie that to a particular business outcome that might have other parts of your organization involved. But the point is, it got you away from just looking at the big ticket items and focused on those things that really are flexible and really kind of give you the ability to kind of ebb and flow with your spend for the year. But yeah, so I do see that more common as we go through time. But yeah, it's important to understand kind of your finances, even if you're not putting together a 5-year IT budget or IT strategy, as most people aren't anymore, because so much changes just in years 2 to 3. You still have to understand how you're spending and what the purposes of that spending is. And if you can help categorize that, the other thing is, don't try and bury costs where you say, ooh, I've got this little pet project. Let me dump it in some bucket with operational to try and get it across the finish line. The very first time you get caught doing that, your credibility goes to 0, and you will never, ever be able to get that back. So be honest, be transparent about it, be candid about it. You're all on the same team. You're all trying to work toward the same goals. And I think that's a way just to also bring the focus of the conversation to the things that really matter.
Yeah. I want to come back to sort of the flip side of that question that I asked you earlier about, that spectrum where infrastructure is on one side, and now at least this year, and maybe for a couple of years, AI will be on the side of innovation and doing new things. How are you seeing? I mean, AI is one of those things that, as we've talked about on this show, every day is a new headline. It's a new area for a lot of people, and so you're trying to figure out like what's real, what's not real, what's important. How are you seeing CIOs kind of just make sense of it, figure out how to prioritize things? Is there a lot of back channeling going on right now between your CIO community saying like, hey, what are you trying? What's working for you? What's real? What's the temperature for them with AI? Because I imagine, and this from the early cloud days as well. Lots of people are coming back from events. Lots of people are reading, news articles, and they're going, hey, why can't we have some of that, whatever that magic is? But it's right now it's still a lot of undetermined types of things.
Yeah. And, we, just like in the early days of cloud, I mean, we're also seeing the AI washing, now improved with AI,
Sure. Right.
And realistically, it's not AI, it's Gen AI that people are talking about. AI has been around since the 60s. Gen AI has been around about 18 months now. It came up again in conversation last week amongst a group of us, and the challenge is, how much do you spend specifically for AI efforts or AI projects, kind of tying it back to the budget. And there were some real questions of, well, what is AI? Like how do I kind of break that out individually? Now, if I kind of back away from what it is for just a minute and talk about it at a macro level, what some of the early experimentation showed us is that you have to have some pretty significant chutzpah to be able to get your arms around AI. Some folks were trying to build their own LLMs and train those, and it was the wild, wild west. I mean, it kind of is today still. However, we're starting to see more and more folks just kind of back away or not even go down that path and say, look, we need a better way to manage this. And so you're seeing things like model selection around some of the general purpose models, whether it's Llama or DALL-E or Gemini or Titan. And then I want to consume that through existing tools from one of the hypervisors. So, Google and Amazon both have really good tool sets that allow you to tap into that. So you don't have to kind of roll your own. But then the other thing is enterprises are looking to find ways to consume this through the existing enterprise applications that they're already running. So instead of trying to figure out how to use this technology and bolt it on to my enterprise application, and hopefully I've got the right guardrails in place, and hopefully I'm not bringing additional risk into the equation more so than the opportunity, if I can just use the generative AI technology that my enterprise vendor, whether it's a Salesforce or SAP, are bringing into the technology, that's actually really attractive because now I don't have to build that organizational expertise around this technology, but rather I can step back and say, okay, how are we going to use it in a meaningful way within our company to benefit our customers, to benefit our employees, to benefit the efficiency of our operations and supply chain? Those are the areas that I'm seeing a market shift to. And so then it becomes hard, like how much money are you spending to do that? And that gets a little muddled because it's baked into the technology itself.
Yeah. It makes sense. So, hey, we're about at time. I wanted to one last topic, and this is more like, hey, what did this look like? You were in New York City recently, I think, and it was HashiCorp.
Yep.
Invited you for the ringing of the bell, and then big announcement, big splash, ringing of the bell, lots of great things, and then less than 24 hours, they got bought.
Actually 48 hours, but
48 hours. So tell everyone what that's like. What?
Oh my gosh, it was it was
it's
a little
just kind
wild.
of a fun story.
I've really kind of gotten to know the HashiCorp team, and it's a great team of folks. And some of the folks there, we've Jay Fry, who we've known for years in the cloud space. He's part of the core team there. But yeah, so they invited me to join them for the ringing of the opening bell at the NASDAQ market site on Monday last week. And it was great. It was a great experience. I had been to the New York Stock Exchange before. I had not been kind of behind the ropes, so to speak, at the NASDAQ, which is kind of cool. Although you can see it all because they're right there on Times Square and it's a big glass wall. It's not as opaque as marble walls at the New York Stock Exchange. But it was just really cool to kind of share that moment with the HashiCorp team. And so, of course, they had not just the executive team, but they had a whole cadre of employees and they had customers there too. So it was a lot of fun to see them all kind of celebrate and have some fun with the opening bell on Monday morning. So that's Monday morning. Monday afternoon, they announced their infrastructure cloud offering, which is a way to kind of accelerate the onboarding and use and broaden out the use of HashiCorp technology. So that's Monday afternoon. Tuesday morning, the Wall Street Journal runs an article around a rumor that IBM is gunning to acquire HashiCorp. And so that started a whole news cycle because, of course, I'm at the NASDAQ market site. So I'm posting on social media, hey, this is really cool. I'm spending time with these folks. And so everybody's like, ooh, Tim's on the ground. Let's go talk to Tim. So it started a whole media cycle where I was getting a ton of inquiries from media and different companies asking, okay, what is this? What does it mean? Do you think it's true? This, that, and the other thing. That was Tuesday. So I go to dinner Tuesday night. Wednesday, I'm working through meetings and I'm supposed to go to a dinner. It was actually the Wall Street Journal CIO Network dinner Wednesday night with the Wall Street Journal CIO Journal team. And at 4 o'clock, I think it was 4 o'clock Eastern, the press release hits that IBM is definitely intent on acquiring HashiCorp. So now it's gone from a rumor to actual news, real news. So that started the media cycle all over again. So the news cycle starts over. I get the same inquiries. Okay, now that it's official, what do you really think? And I had written up a brief post Tuesday night because I'm like, gosh, there's a lot more to this that people need to be thinking about. And then, of course, Wednesday, it became official. And then the onslaught of briefings. And then Thursday, I flew to San Francisco. And by Friday, I was on briefings with the IBM and HashiCorp team, kind of outlining, how that's going to play out and how they're thinking this will kind of work. Because there are questions around, well, where does HashiCorp kind of fit in with IBM Cloud and with Red Hat? And how does Terraform kind of fit in with Ansible and talking about day 0 and day 1 and day 2 and the rest. And so there are a lot of questions, but God, what a wild week. I mean, it was just a series of kind of things. And it all spun off, I think, because I was so public about my participating in the opening bell at the NASDAQ, which is, again, that was just really cool. And I'm really grateful to that they invited me to join them for that.
Good stuff. Good stuff. It's sort of like the guy who took that picture when Sully put the plane down in the ocean, or not in the ocean, in the
Hudson
in New York. He didn't know what he was getting himself into, but now all of a sudden you're not only in the middle of the story, you're part of the story. So Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, listen, Tim, I know you're a busy man. We appreciate the time today. If folks, CIOs or future plan to be CIOs want to get in touch with you, pick your brain, what's the best way to engage with you or just reach out to you?
Yeah, best way is definitely check out the website, avoa.com, and you can get to all the different things, whether it's the podcast, CIO in the Know, CXO in the Know, which are going to have new episodes here in short order. So a little announcement there. And then there's a newsletter on LinkedIn. And then you can connect with me through LinkedIn and follow me on X or Twitter or whatever we're calling it today.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah. But well, thanks again, guys. It's great to see you and honored to be a repeat guest on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we get to see you again in person sometime soon here. Aaron, you want to wrap us up and take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. So on behalf of Tim and Brian and myself, everyone out there, thank you very much for listening. We certainly appreciate it. And if you enjoy the show, please, if you can, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, or certainly tell a friend as well. And so for that, I'm going to wrap it up for this week, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.